Well, the manufacturing sector is set for relief as the federal government is set to kick off its two programs targeted at alleviating the impact of fuel subsidy removal. That's the Presidential Conditional Grant Programme and the Presidential Palliative Loans Programme. Under the Presidential Conditional Grants Programme, the federal government will disburse a sum of 50,000 Naira to nano businesses across 774 local government areas, while under the Presidential Palliative Loan Programme, or MSMEs, the federal government will disburse 75 billion Naira to micro, small and medium enterprises and 75 billion Naira to specifically to manufacturers. This is large, is much. But let's look at the impact of this as we move on. And for more on this, I'm being joined live in the studio by the Director General of the Nigerian Employers Consultative Association, Mr. Adewale Oyerinde. Thank you so much. Let's say compliments of the season. It's good to have you in the studio.
Thank you. Thanks for having us once again.
Whatever it is, we must always be happy that it's Christmas.
Absolutely.
Yes, it's that time where let's start with this conversation around minimum wage. I want us to start with that because I'm so concerned about what this means. Economists have said inflation will continue to bite hard when we do this. But where you sit, what do you make of all of this back and forth around it and what's been happening recently around minimum wage?
Thank you, and it's quite it's nice that we're starting with that conversation. It's neither here nor there. There's a National Minimum Wage Act, and the negotiation that took place about 5 years ago, which specified that the new national minimum wage should commence, implementation should commence in 2024.
Yes.
And ILO Convention 131 also affirmed the processes that should lead to the negotiation of national minimum wage. We are aware that the Ministry of Labour has also sent letters to critical stakeholders that are supposed to be part of that negotiation, which is labor, organized businesses, represented by NECA and UPS, and then some other stakeholders that will play a role in negotiating the national minimum wage. So whether it will fuel inflation or not, that is not the issue, because inflation rate itself has caught up with the 30,000 minimum wage that we had in 5 years' time. So in other developed climes where the system works, what they do is to hedge wages against inflation. So as inflation is going up, there's a system that naturally or systematically adjusts wages to hedge against inflation, so that you keep the value of the disposable income of the individual, you keep it at par or slightly ahead of inflation, so that inflation does not make a mess of that particular national minimum wage. Now, coming back to the local issues, I think there's a lot of misinformation that we just need to clear here.
True.
Now, there was a negotiation between the federal government and Labour early this year. That is a bipartite conversation where the federal government approved a 30,000 wage award to its employees for 6 months. Now, there has been serious misinformation, even from people that should know or that should understand, whether it's through mischief, we wouldn't say. But that is not a new national minimum wage. It was a wage award for federal government workers for 6 months. So you cannot, in whatever context, say that is a new national minimum wage. It cannot be. The process of setting a new national minimum wage is enshrined in ILO Convention 131, which Nigeria ratified. And we all know these processes. The process was used to arrive at the minimum wage of 18,000 a few years ago. The same process was used to arrive at the minimum wage of 30,000 5 years ago. So it is quite mischievous when people come out and say there's a new national minimum wage of 65,000. That is not correct. It's absolutely not correct. Now, the negotiation between government and Labour, yes, it was a bipartite negotiation. And when people drag in the private sector into it, that agreement is binding on the private sector, it's quite laughable. You cannot shave my head behind me. It was a bipartite agreement that is allowable. So if you want to expand the context for this to affect the private sector, then you would have brought the private sector to the context of that negotiation.
Sure.
Now, it was a bipartite agreement that is allowable, that is legal, that is understandable. It could have been between government and the employers. And it could have been between Labour and employers, which is allowable. I share an experience with you. At the height of COVID, when businesses were actually struggling, everybody was not working, there was a bipartite agreement between organized labor and the employers to say whatever the issue within the context of this period, employers will not retrench staff. It was an MOU that was signed, and employers lived to that understanding. We didn't call government to it, and we didn't say it is binding on government, because it was a bipartite agreement between employers and organized labor. So that is the premise in which we say the negotiation between labor and government was okay. And if you check the MOU that was signed between government and labor, it specified the federal government will implement, and it urged the states, the local government, and the private sector to consider doing likewise. So the federal government cannot negotiate on behalf of the private sector. We don't take allocation from the federal government. You don't give us money. You don't allocate funds to the private sector. So why will you insist, or will you say that what you negotiated at that level should be enforced on the private sector? Suffice to say that if you remember the president's comment in August 3rd, when the president made a national broadcast, he actually commended the private sector for taking the lead by providing palliatives, by providing support. We don't call it palliatives now, by addressing the welfare issues of staff in the organized private sector, even before the government agreed with labor for the issue of 35,000. So the private sector have taken the lead. We have come up with different schemes to address the welfare issues of employees. So it's important that we clear it that the negotiation between government and labor resulted in the award of 35,000 for 6 months. It was clearly stated in that MOU. So it wasn't in any ramification a national minimum wage. The conversation and negotiation for a new national minimum wage will probably start in January, which will result in the formalization of a new act of the new national minimum wage act for 2025. That is the position that organized businesses hold, and that is actually the true position as we all know it.
We're trying to address the fallout of fuel subsidy removal. Obviously, government is doing all that it can, and one of it is to the distribution of monies to small businesses, to some specific manufacturers, to I think 75 billion for that, and some amount for small businesses and all. What do you make of this? Some say it seems to be a step in the right direction if properly administered.
Well, we commended the president's speech then when it was announced that 50,000 to nano industries and the 75 billion was for the manufacturing industries. Now, beyond the apportionment, it was a grant that you pay back.
Yes.
Single-digit interest.
It's not free money.
It's not free money. Now, it's a step in the good direction, a good step in a good direction. But beyond the funds, beyond the disbursement, it is important that we don't run into the crisis of the last administration, where the CBN was involved in so many interventions without verifiable organizations that benefit from those funds. So it is critical that we address the issue of data. Those organizations that are benefit, especially in the nano industries, are they registered Nigerian businesses? Do they have the certificate of incorporation? Because for the nano industries, it's another way of getting everybody into the banking system. So distribute, make sure they have all the necessary documents and the rest. Then for the manufacturing, we also think it's a good step in a good direction. But beyond that, if you give a business 100 billion grant, let's assume 100 billion grant that is not going to pay back. If you don't address the fundamental issues of the operating environment, then the whole money you will have given will go down the drain. If the regulatory and the legislative environment is still inhospitable, if there is still issue of multiplicity of taxes, if the exchange rate is still unfavorable to business operations, if you don't address those issues, then you will have set up the business to fail. Sure. Because the last administration, part of the challenges that mostly in the SMEs, those that collected the grant and the loan. Now I collected a ₦1 million grant or loan, then I have to spend a substantial part of it to provide my own energy. Mm-hmm. I have to pay a substantial part of the same loan to pay interest, because as you are collecting the loan, you are supposed to be paying interest. So if you don't deal with the whole gamut of the regulatory and legislative environment, you have just set up those businesses for crisis. So as government is releasing the funds, they should also take concurrent look at the regulatory and legislative environment to make sure that they are conducive for organized businesses to operate. Without that, there's going to be a problem.
Beautiful stuff. Let's move quickly. We see the likes of Smedan also partnering, doing a lot, partnered with, I think,
Sterlingman.
And also with Sterling Bank. I've seen one also with even the state government now. I think that should be Anambra, Soludo. And I can see a lot of partnership and all of that, looking at particularly 5 billion naira here, single digit loan. What do you make of this sort of intervention?
Beautiful intervention, good step by the new DG of Smedan. We commend what he's doing, but still, if you don't deal with the other side of it, the regulatory and the legislative part of it, you realize from the regulatory authorities will still create a different kind of bottlenecks for these same businesses that you're trying to support. And that's why the role of the coordinating minister of the economy is quite important. Very, very important at this stage. So that one regulatory authority or one department or agency is not contradicting, or its activities is not contradicting the efforts of government in another direction. A government agency might be driving the issue of job creation. The Ministry of Labor and Employment might be pursuing the issue of generation of employment. Agencies like the ITF might be pursuing the issue of generation of employment. And you still have some agencies of the same government working at cross-purpose, stifling those agencies or stifling those businesses that are supposed to create jobs. So the coordination, interministerial coordination, is quite important for us to achieve the objective that we want to achieve. If not, like we saw it in past administrations, the monetary authorities will focus on driving monetary issues. The fiscal authorities will focus on driving fiscal issues, while both of them are actually cancelling out the efforts of each other. So the work of the coordinating minister and Minister of Finance is quite important in getting this administration to achieve its 7-point renewed hope agenda.
Everyone is hopeful that handshake would happen between in person. Now we're talking about the likes of Mr. Cardoso and of course Mr. Wale Edun, because we need that handshake for us to move on. It's end of the year, and many will say we expect boom, buying, manufacturers should be, a lot of production should be on. But considering the purchasing power, some say, no, that's not the case. You're a player in this industry. What are you seeing at this time?
As at a month ago, there was a report from our stable that over 250 billion unsold stocks are existing in the manufacturing sector. Now, the risk is this. With 250 billion stocks unsold, those stocks, the risk expiry. Because if they are not off-taked by consumers due to the low purchasing power of consumers, the risk expiry. And if the business cannot sell and those goods, they expire, then those businesses that are probably running on credit, on loans, will probably have challenges with their creditors. Now, if that happened to a business, two things will happen. Two of many things will happen. It will either reduce its capacity utilization, or in the extreme, it decides to take its funds and divest from this country. And when they divest, as we have seen in the last 1 year, it will shock you that over 10 companies, some multinationals that have been here for 20, 30 years, they are actually divesting and they are leaving this country. Now imagine a company that has 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 10,000 employees divesting from this country, going somewhere else to trade, then what happens to the issues of employment? Now, the fiscal and monetary authorities might say, or the custom might say, or other regulatory agencies might say, yes, we are doing well within the context of regulation. The legislators might say, yes, we are carrying out our oversight functions. And these oversight functions and these regulatory activities is actually stifling and contradicting the efforts of the federal government to attract FDI and also sustain local businesses. While you are saying in one breath, yes, Eureka, we are doing well within the context of regulation. Meanwhile, we are deepening the crisis within the context of unemployment. Because once these companies, once they leave, then we have created a different context of challenges for ourselves. Unemployment, with so many issues of insecurity that comes with it. So it boils down to coordination. Coordination and deep, focused, transparent private sector engagement. That is the direction that we should go in achieving all the interventions and the projects that we have, whether the disbursement of the 75 billion, whether the disbursement of the 5 billion by SMEDAN, whether the implementation of so many of these policies. We need a deep, transparent, and focused private sector engagement. The real private sector, not the quasi groups that we have, mushrooming themselves as private sector organizations now. Interesting stuff.
So finally, the president has been, of course, looking for investors, telling them the country is opened. We can go on and on. We started, and just yesterday he got back from UAE. Yeah. Lots mixed reactions. But in your thoughts, what do you think will be the positive fallout from all of these trips?
One of the good things that have come out with the employers, the global employers, and the global trade union, International Trade Union Federation, we actually yesterday had a concurrence where we urged the government, global government, to take the issue of just transition very, very seriously, to take the issue of climate change very, very seriously. That they should not look at those issues within the context of their own. They should look at it within the context of job creation. They should look at it within the context of decent work, and also work with employers and workers' organizations to drive this conversation. I read the Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister of the Economy said one of the options open to government now is not focusing on debt financing as a direct debt financing, but look towards climate financing. And it was reported that the UAE government actually budgeted over 300 billion for climate financing. So if you play your card very well, and you play the politics very well at that stage, you might have access to cheap funds, you might have access to even free funds to drive your economy and drive it to a positive trajectory.
Interesting conversation. DG Amos, thank you so much. I've been speaking to the Director General of the Nigerian Employers Consultative Association, Mr. Dewale Oyerinde, a friend of the house. Thank you so much. It's good to have you in the studio.
Thank you for having us.
All right then.